Hello, my name is Katie Groves, and this is part 6 in my Deprogramming series about deprogramming from trauma-based mind control. If you've not done so already, I ask that you watch the first 2 videos in this series, linked in the description below, for disclaimers and safety tips about watching these videos. This video is a continuation of my last video in which I talked about meeting my inner child, but can be watched by itself. It's about tools that I've used to help my inner child heal in the early stages of my healing process. I talked about non-dominant handwriting exercises as a way of making contact with my inner child, and now I'm going to talk about some ways in which I helped comfort my inner child in the beginning stages of my healing. Making contact with my inner child was very scary but very exciting, and I found out a lot about myself in the very beginning by talking with him/her. My inner child is in multiple parts, although we've done a lot of healing since then, since the beginning, to piece these parts back together, to integrate from DID. In the beginning, I found that my inner child had multiple voices, multiple identities, and was often surrounded by inner abuser parts. These are parts that were programmed by the cult to hurt the inner child and keep my inner child locked up, bound, unable to speak, and unable to point me, my adult host self, to the truth of who we are and of what was going on. My inner children contained the core awarenesses of the programming and often held a lot of the programming, but it was the inner abuser parts that really held the programming in place. Once those parts are dealt with, I find that the programming often naturally unwinds. So a lot of my early healing work was around diffusing the conflict between my inner child parts and my inner abuser parts. At first, I recognized those inner abuser parts to be mostly male and mostly adult, but I came to find that they're of all ages and genders, and in fact, mostly young, mostly children themselves. And it's a strange way to talk about it, really, because these parts are all me, and these abuser parts are actually parts of the inner child parts themselves. They split off out of these inner children and then turned backwards, facing the inner child inside in the imagery that I see when I think about this, and directed verbal abuse and physical abuse towards these inner children, keeping them locked up. But they really are simply parts of those inner children, parts of me that were split off and conditioned that way. So in working with these parts in the beginning, I learned to simply listen, to turn my focus inward, which was new for me and very exciting. As a mind control program slave, I had never looked inward and listened to my thoughts before. And so looking inward and listening to these voices, while painful, was very exciting. And I found a lot of relief immediately upon simply becoming aware of these violent, abusive voices. And I started experiencing myself in co-consciousness with the inner child parts, and feeling their pain, and feeling the shame, and the horrible emotions that come with being abused in these ways. And at first, I would even have the tendency to fight with these parts, to argue with them, to beg them to stop abusing me, as if I was that child myself. But I found over time that recognizing these parts as a part of me, accepting them and integrating them into my personality was vital. And that meant having empathy for them, recognizing that they themselves are the very frightened child that I was experiencing myself to be, and that they had been programmed through torture and rape, and that there was nothing wrong with them, that they're not abusive, they're not really abusers, they're just frightened children who've been programmed to speak and lash out in certain violent ways. The moment I started paying attention to these inner abuser parts and working with my inner child to establish safety inside, my inner child began reaching out to me and talking to me about things that they had been through, and allowing me more and more access to the memories that kept my programming in place, the trauma that kept the programming in place. And so everything that I did in the beginning, if I wanted to heal, had to revolve around keeping these small children parts safe and constantly working to diffuse the inner violence that they were being subjected to by other dissociative parts. This morning I was thinking about all this, and I had a thought that, can I remember it? The exact words. Differentiation implies opposition. That as long as I am split apart, as long as I am fragmented, that I am in opposition with myself. That DID is a form of denial, the belief that I'm not myself, that certain attributes, thoughts and feelings, memories that I have are not really mine. And so there's a rejection, and there is subsequent opposition that takes place inside. And so if I want to live peacefully, if I want to be free from this conflict, I must become less differentiated. And that's what it's looked like for me. I've had to become less multiple and more integrated. And so to give my inner children the peace, well-being that they need and deserve, I've had to integrate and make peace with myself. Another tool that has been very helpful for me in all of this, which I've mentioned before, is writing. I did almost non-stop automatic writing in the beginning of my healing process. For about a year, over a year, I wrote several hours a day, just pouring out thoughts and feelings and memories and language from programming that parts of me needed to release. And this was very overwhelming, and I had a lot of trouble pacing my healing, but I had to just get it out and get it out and get it out. Another thing for me was establishing physical safety. It's a big one. Physical safety from the cult. By asking my inner child when he and she felt safe around certain people and when they did not. And that was what enabled me to get away from certain people who were trying to keep my programming in place. Handlers, members of the cult who were there to try and keep me dissociated and keep me unaware. So listening to my inner child, checking in with my inner child and asking them when they felt safe around certain people and when they did not, really helped me to get away from the cult and to establish a physical safety that enabled me to focus on healing and not on re-traumatization. Lastly, I want to say comfort. I mentioned that word before in this video. Speaking to my inner child in a calming voice, not ordering this child around, but setting boundaries in appropriate ways and giving my child the structure that they deserve, that they did not get as children. And by structure, I don't mean the rigidly harsh rules of the cult, but creating safe spaces with boundaries where my child can play, where my inner child can heal, where my inner child can express themselves, feel safe to do so. So in the next video, I'm going to talk about inner child expression, allowing my inner child to write and to draw and to express themselves through play, through art, and through communication with safe support people. Thank you.